Hi, welcome to Higherroadtoyou. This is Mark Stouffer, and I'm just so much intrigued by this content that I'm going to show you. And I know it's going to help a lot of people. You got to apply, you got to take action, obviously. But ultimately, the truth is the truth. The statistics are real and they are serious, and we have to take massive action. I want to give you a little backstory to give you some context, right? I grew up in a household that was very toxic. It was a matriarch mindset, where men didn't have a say. And my grandfather, even though he went through World War II, he fought in 3 wars, the Korean War and the Vietnam War. And so he was a decorated Navy soldier. And but he didn't have any influence in his house, and it was a train wreck. His kids were a train wreck. And he was gone 9 months out of the year. And he'd throw up his hands. He could not get through to an overbearing wife, which was my grandmother. And my mom, my aunt, and my uncle were train wrecks. And it was a lot of toxicity going on. But fortunately, my brother and I, my brother rebelled first, And I remember just being a servant to this crystal and the china and all the things that my grandmother, I think it was her way of avoiding the train wreck and serving all this stuff that just accumulated to a level that was just truly unhealthy. It's like hoarding, but hoarding china and crystal and other. I remember being like 10 years old. How many sets of china do you need? And my brother, he jumped out of a window, early in the morning because he was escaping this, tyrant of a household where it's like, okay, we have work to do. And that was moving around all this stuff and cleaning stuff. And so as a kid at that age, you just want to head down to the park on a weekend and play with your friends. And after school, you want to play in the court and with all the other kids. And my grandmother it was her way of controlling something in her life because her kids, she could not. It was again a trade wreck. So I remember my brother, jumping out of a window. My grandmother catch him one day, and she's like, "You're gonna mow this lawn," And so we were on a thoroughfare, and he grabbed the lawnmower and he wrote "F you," in the lawn, so that everybody that passed by would read this, because it was on a kind of a slant, and so. That was his way of saying I'm done, and I think it was healthy to a degree where we broke away from that and we realized that we had to find our way. And even though there was a lot of toxic influence, there was drugs, there was crime, and there was just things that we should not have been involved with, but ultimately the testosterone is the driving factor in all this, right? And I remember my counselor saying, "Hey, look, school is not for everybody." I had 5 probation officers before going into high school. He said, "I can get you into trade school. You're going to be working with your hands. School is not for everybody, right?" And I propose that the trades right now, pivoting into the trades, is a very respectable, career path. And if you enjoy, working on equipment, I put my kids. If there was a child labor law, I broke them all. And to that, I say, you're welcome. Right? I unplugged, I ripped the cable out of the wall. I unplugged my kids from video games and flat screens, and I didn't want them watching, sitcoms and, series on whatever. I said, men are dumbified on these commercials and sitcoms and movies. And I said, it's subliminal, right? I don't want you to believe that crap, right? It's entertainment, but it still has impact. It's like when they show somebody wearing cool glasses, all of a sudden they're, selling off the shelf, and it has an influence, and it's not a positive one. It doesn't end well. So, I always was in the forefront of that, just to tell my kids, specifically my boys, that that's just not healthy, right? And see it for what it is. And so, I believe that it really did make an impact. I do know, because the fruit of their life, they have a world perspective. And I say, they're a child labor law. I broke them all. And it's not, my son says, "Stop saying that, Dad. It upsets me." I said, "Well, you know what? You have a lifestyle that most people dream about. Most adults dream about. And I want them to know that you earned it. It wasn't handed to you on a silver platter. And that's important, right? If you get into trades, you got to work your way up through the ranks. That's why I put them in sports. Coaches like the manager, boss, teammates, the coworkers, people in the stands, the customers. They learn life lessons. There's no shortcut. There's none, right? You gotta, if you put your foot on the field, you gotta give 100%, or you get cut from the team, or you get benched. And that is life. That is life. And the job is the boss. It wasn't long ago that my youngest son and I worked 32 hours straight. Now his older brother was working 18-hour days for a period of time. He needed help. So we came in beside him and got the job done. We worked 32 hours straight. And I said, look, we got the weather on our side, we have the equipment, and we have the material. And the job is the boss. And the contractor could come in behind us and and finish the work, right? And so, that's the way life is, and that's the way life works. It doesn't work in front of a flat screen, it doesn't work in front of a video game, right? And so, I told my kids, yeah, I know you love those video games, you're going to earn that right on the weekend. And I said, minutes turn into hours, hours of days, days of weeks, weeks of months, months of years, and life will pass you by, and nobody gives a what level you're on. And, it's meaningless, right? There's no real purpose in that endeavor, right? And I would be ashamed of my kids if they created a video game addictive, app that didn't have some purpose. So with that, I'm going to let you listen to this content, and I hope that you'll leave some comments. Let me know what you think. And here we go.
I was looking at some stats earlier on that said there's been increased sexual inactivity amongst young men, which is an interesting stat. It's risen to almost 31% of men between the ages of 18 and 24 reporting no sexual activity in the past year. So that's almost doubled in about the space of 18 years.
Yeah.
Here's an interesting stat. High suicide rates amongst men. Men account for nearly 80% of all suicides in the US. The highest rate observed among 45 to 64-year-olds globally. Suicide is the leading cause of death amongst young men. And a survey conducted in the UK found that an increasing amount of men feel hopeless and worthless and that are struggling with finding meaning and purpose in the world. The plight of young men. You talk in your books and in your work about how the role of a man has changed and how that this might not be necessarily productive for the health and well-being of a man.
Now, I'm going to stop there and speak to that. I mean, I'm going to tell you, at 14 and a half, I was jumping out of a 2-story window and I stealing my mom's boyfriend's car, to go meet a girl. And I'll tell you, my youngest son, his older brother called me at 2:30 and said, hey, do you know where Brent is? My youngest son. And I said, is everything okay? I was obviously concerned. And he said, you have no idea. Well, it was joyriding, right? He wasn't old enough to be driving, didn't have a driver's license. Or a girl had a birthday. She was born at 12:26 in the morning, and they had a party at Denny's in a local town near us. And he was calling his older brother to bail him out. Says, hey, if you pick me up, bring his sister and, get me home so I can break the news to dad when in the morning, right? And so his brothers, said, hey, you're on your own, man. And so he calls me. And so I went, off the freeway and picked him up, and there's sheriffs there, highway patrol. And I was just in disbelief, right? And I was like, wow, I am so sorry. I'm sorry that you have to contend with this. I'm sorry but thank you for doing your job. And I'm in disbelief. And they said, oh, you know what? He's a good kid. There was no drugs. There was, he goes, some girl, we were boys once too, right? And I said, they showed me the ticket and all the fines, and we could have towed the truck. That would have been an extra expense, and we could have put him in local jail, and all of these things to check him out would have added to the bill. And I said, hey, I put my hands up, not my bill. It's his bill. He has no idea, the cost of this gift that he's given this, this girl to be at her birthday. And, I was just like, I just didn't expect it. But at the same time, deep down, I was like, wow, man, son, okay, there's a price to pay. And I told the police officer, hey, this is not my bill. He's going to come home every day. He has no idea what it's going to cost him. And I said to him, I got home, and then I said, call he had a friend with him. They call him now. He says, can we drop him off in the morning? I go, it is morning. Call him. And I dropped his friend off at his father's, their parents. They had no idea they were out joyriding. And then I told my son, I said, look, when you get home, just put your coveralls, put your work clothes on. you're going to pay for this ticket. And it's going to, you have no idea what it's going to cost you on your insurance, getting a license. You may never drive until you're 21. And that is the repercussion of your actions. And I would say that, I was the patriarch in the family. I would constantly override, my wife would tell me, like, no, we're not, that's not going to happen, not on my watch. And so, it's building that foundation to create the foundation so they would have resiliency. Like, I put them in sports because the coach, like the manager, boss, or the owner of the company, the teammates are the coworkers, the people in the stands are the customers. They learn life lessons. Welcome to life. That is how you navigate the world. You're always on display. I said to my kids, you don't put 100%, everybody's going to let you know, right? You're going to get benched, or you're going to get cut from the team, and then you're going to have to work. So there is no shortcuts. And so my oldest son said, I don't want to play sports. I go, okay, great. I got a list for you. And if it's not done to my standards, then you won't sleep. I will not let you sleep. And we will be up together and we will finish the job. The job is the boss, right? And that's the reality of life. And that's where you find purpose. So let me know. I'm going to continue watching this content because I'm fascinated by it. I'm curious why more parents don't adhere to it.
Yeah, we've taken away their purpose. When you take a human being's purpose away, remember the purpose for men was to protect their family, it was to hunt in the old days, feed their families, but it was also to protect their families. It was to provide for their families. And what we've done in reversing everything is, although we raised up women, and there are certainly positive things about raising up women, but when we raised up women, we denigrated men. And I have 2 sons, so this is very personal for me. And I also see a lot of young men in my practice, young adult men. And what I'll say is that they feel discouraged, they feel purposeless, they feel diminished. Yeah. And there has been something vengeful, I think, about. So the feminist movement was meant to give women choice and to balance off what was imbalanced in society. But there's something vengeful about it. I think at moments I feel like there's something vengeful about the modern feminist movement, which is, let's get them, let's diminish them, let's take over, let's push them out, let's beat them up, let's show them something really vengeful. So so for me, the feminist movement was meant to create balance. It wasn't meant to set into play this other kind of imbalance. And more than, I think, 60% of universities are women now, as well as graduate schools. And so that means, and the studies show that men will marry at their educational level or below. Women will only marry at their educational level or above. And by diminishing men so much in terms of our education and professions, we've basically taken men's purpose away. They feel purposeless. And the other thing is, and I'm going to say, when men stay home to nurture their children, now remember, as mammals, we have defined roles. That is not instinctual for men to stay home and nurture their young. It's a reverse of something. And the issue there is that there's an inverse relationship between oxytocin and testosterone. The higher the oxytocin, guess what?
The lower the testosterone.
Yes.
So if we're staying at home bonding, then
there's
our
a reason
testosterone
for
drops.
that. So mammals, when they are nurturing their young, they don't want somebody mating with them. Go away, right? So the idea is that when a female nurtures, she doesn't want to have sex. She doesn't want to, right? So the investment in nurturing pushes away the investment in mating.
And this is why I've read so many stats around men's testosterone dropping when they become fathers. I couldn't believe that was true when I read it.
It's true. There was some studies to talk about how women's testosterone goes up. Women have testosterone. when they're out in the work world fighting like men, that their testosterone goes up and men's testosterone when they stay home goes down. Now, what that's doing for sex lives, there's some research about, that is the next wave, which is what does it do to sex lives? Because men have to perform, they have to get it up, to be crude.
Tell me about it.
And so if your testosterone is low, you're not going to get it up, right? Which is why there's all this Viagra and these patches and supplements and, because it's not instinctually normal for husbands to stay home and nurture their children. And that's the inconvenient truth. How that affects men's and women's sex life when women come home from their banking jobs and their law jobs, do their husbands not want to have sex with them? And, is that breaking up? So this is all I think this is the next wave of, we've reversed things societally so fast. And then we hope that our evolutionary bodily responses are just going to catch up in merely a century. And it just doesn't, evolution doesn't work like that. It takes hundreds, if not thousands of years to change our bodily evolutionary responses, right? Our instinctual responses. So this is, it's problematic. And also when men's testosterone goes down, they get depressed.
I want to speak to that. I waited until my boys were older before I nurtured them, but my nurturing was, there's a job to do. There's work to do. We work hard and then we play hard. And I think that was what allowed them to navigate that surge of testosterone. Like with me, jumping out of a window at 2 in the morning, stealing my mom's car. And, I was out all night and, I didn't care about school. But, a counselor came beside me and said, hey, school's not for everybody. I probably had a 4th grade, educational level. And then but I could get into a vocational school. He goes, just show up and try. And I'll get you into that vocational school and learn a trade that you will enjoy and they'll pay you for it. And so that to me is the answer, truly, to just unplug kids and get them into something that they will enjoy. It's building cars and operating equipment, underground. Construction is an amazing opportunity. It's amazing, channel to really feel purpose in your life. And especially kids that aren't doing well in school. And she's going to speak to this in a little bit. And I related to it because I experienced it firsthand and we overcame it. We built the foundation. We thrived, coming through this. And I look at my kids, we may not get along all the time. That's okay. I see their life and that's a kiss from God. That's all that matters to me, And so, there's a lot of coaches that I had. There was a lot of mentors that I had that I didn't like because they tested me and they pushed me to another level of play. And then I look back later and I go, wow, I can appreciate it maybe 10, 15, 20 years later. And so that's kind of how it plays out, I understand more about my dad that was ostracized and kicked out of the home and he didn't do anything wrong. And there was a lot of things that were made up, fabricated, right? And there was a lot of fabrication. There was a lot of twisting of truth in my home and my environment. And not until many, many, many years later did I understand and learn the truth, right? And it's sad, it's unfortunate. And I always say, to what gain, right? There was, a lot of criminal activity. There was shoplifting, there was insurance scams, there was drug, and it was ugly. And at the same time, it was under the influence of a matriarchal kind of environment. And, I was thankful that we were able to break away from that. I was thankful that I was able to separate my family and separate myself from that influence. And I would say that's sports and hard work and getting the job done and being physically active, specifically men, it gives them the purpose, gives them the foundation to have that resiliency. So with that, we're going to continue listening to this amazing interview right here.
So they don't perform sexually well, they get depressed, they feel purposeless. They can't do what they're instinctually supposed to do, which is provide, protect, hunt. You know, we talk about DEI. I mean, why aren't we talking about DEI when it comes to men and women? Why aren't we talking about balancing the scales, giving men purpose again? And honestly, we should be talking about what happens to men when they actually do stay home and nurture their young.
Is there stats to support the idea that if you're at home raising your kids as a man, you struggle in the bedroom? Or is
So
it,
there was some research I know that was going on about that, how it affects sex drive. But when your testosterone goes down, it does affect sex drive.
Mhm.
We're just not talking about it. So I have anecdotal patients. I have a patient whose wife was a hardcore woman in finance, and he couldn't. He lost interest in her. He had to go out of the marriage and have affairs with women who were more feminine, who were more, so he could feel as if he could play that masculine role. He couldn't do that in his marriage.
I want to speak to that. It was a constant competition, and yeah, you can't have a patriarch and a matriarch in the same home. It's just not going to happen. It's like having two steering wheels in a car and trying to get across the country, and synchronizing is very difficult. Somebody's got to lead the program. And I chose, not to ignore the elephants in the room. I chose to see it for what it was. I saw whitecaps, cloud formation, and went through many counselors, marriage counselors, and marriage retreats and all these kinds of things. And what was difficult was there was always this, there's this saying of sisterhood, and I'll tell you what, I don't know if I believe that. I had a lot of jobs where there was a lot of, situations that would compromise my relationship. I never went outside the marriage. Was it difficult? It was extremely difficult, absolutely extremely difficult. It was just brutal, honestly. And I would say I could relate to most men in marriages, especially sexless marriages. I was just like, that's not going to happen. I'm so sorry. I had a lot of testosterone shooting through my veins, and I was working really hard, and I knew what I needed, and I just, set that boundary. But what was difficult was there was always an undermine. There was always this undermining situation where, this holier than thou, innocent, soft-spoken presentation, it just created this perfect environment to master the natural ability to deceive. And I guess I could have been more sensitive to that, and I'm trying to relate to men that are in these sexless marriages, and they would go outside because they're getting dominated on such a level that's so demeaning that anything outside of that relationship, it's just like a kiss from God, man. Like you exist. And I can relate to that, honestly. So, I think there's so much that they're speaking about, and we'll continue this video, but I lived it, I experienced it, and I had to navigate it. And, I'm thankful to be out of that relationship. Honestly, I don't have any regrets whatsoever. I'm glad that I was able to raise my boys in that environment and have a say and not look the other way and not cower and submit and see the elephants for what they were and address them, because they don't get smaller. They don't get bigger, and they multiply. So, there's no shortcut. I'm sorry. I've experienced enough life to know that. And, I tell, women that are career minded and say, you take everything that comes with it. You want to be on the front line. You want to go out on that battlefield. We have many, 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 many generations of men that have fought that. It's in our DNA. It's in our DNA. You can't take it out. And you can try, but it doesn't end well. So I think that's what we're going to speak about here, and continue to enjoy this interview.
And so are we going to see kind of a shift in society as a result of this? We're already seeing it. I mean, the other thing that we're doing is to young boys. Let's talk about what we're doing to young boys. This starts very young. We basically educate young boys in a way that really favors girls. From a very young age, we talk about being able to sit quietly and regulate your emotions and not be aggressive and not be impulsive. And these little boys are being diagnosed with ADHD, many of them just for being little boys. Little boys need to run around. They have a lot of physical energy. They have tons of testosterone. When you're like between 3 and 6, you have a surge of testosterone, and all you want to do is run and jump and play and be outside. And what we're doing, we're putting them in school, making them sit in circle time. So we marginalize them, we label them, we say they have a problem, we say that they have ADHD, they have behavioral problems. And in many of them, the stress that I talked about is the stress of making little boys be more like little girls.
Now, I want to speak to that point is that I realized that. I experienced that. And I didn't do well in school because I was like, I would cut school and I was a troubled child for that reason. And girls were trouble from a very early age. They had influence on me and brought me into, a closet or an area where there was a lot of things that I was exposed to at a very young age. And my babysitter, I can remember, getting picked up, right? And I was probably, 5 maybe, and she took me into our trailer. My parents had a trailer and stripped us down as, we were playing, doctor basically. And, it's like, she did this constantly. There was a point where I hid myself and just feeling that's like, okay, something's not right about this. I couldn't explain it entirely, but the bottom line was that I remember hiding and then looking out the window and just the neighbors and starting to accumulate, this crowd of people that were looking for me. And then my dad came around and walked into a room and came picked me up and said, "Hey, bud," and I said, "Hey, they're all looking for me." And I couldn't explain at that time, but it wasn't until later that I did explain to my dad, and I was older at this time as a teenager, and I said, "Hey, man, this babysitter's coming on, this is happening." And he says, "Hey, do everything she tells you." That was the advice from my dad and my uncle. And so I navigated a lot of things that I should not have been exposed to at a very young age. And, I realized that was the kind of influence that would impact my kids, my boys, just like this. And I remember working with a young man and trying to bring him up through the ranks and trying to teach him some things. And he was a troubled child and he had ADHD and all that. And his mom, and she packs this lunch for him, and it was a 2-liter soda bottle, all this processed crap. And I said, "You know what? He's got enough problems in his life. You're going to feed him this garbage?" I mean, he's got these, it was one of those, she kept labeling him as having Asperger's. And I said, if he does, that's even more reason to get him on a very, very healthy diet. He's not a healthy kid already. And now you're putting him on all this crap. And I spoke to Dad, and his dad's like, he couldn't make a decision to save his life. And that's what I grew up in. And I got angry. And I looked at this young man. I said, "Look, you don't have a fighting chance. You got to get out of this situation, because the way you take care of your body is going to directly impact your life." And now he's on heroin, right? And his mommy, it has to go to some, drug facility to navigate this situation that she's in. And, it's disgusting, it's sad, it's pathetic, and it's not rocket science. So what we're talking about here, the real reason men are giving up is that they are provided an environment that is not healthy, not rocket science. So we'll continue this amazing interview.
And that's where it starts. And so then they go into childhood. And again, the educational system favors the way girls learn, not the way boys learn. How do boys learn? Boys have attention spans for very short periods of time, and then they need lots of physical activity. So ideally, if you go to and look at the boys' schools, what do? They run the boys like running the dogs in the park. They sit for 45 minutes or half an hour, but then the boys get time off to run around. And then they'll sit another half an hour and then they'll run around. I mean, they have like 4 Reese's periods a day. And so that's really better for boys. And little girls have more of a capacity to sit quietly in circle time and sort of, they don't have as much testosterone. They don't have that need to run and jump and play to the same degree that little boys do. They do need to play. We're not letting our kids play, boys and girls, because we're trying to force left brain development on them too early. But we are forcing little boys into this box, and they're not doing well in that box. And then they're labeled. They're labeled as having behavioral problems, ADHD, and that label then follows them through childhood, sometimes into middle school, into high school. Yeah.
What would you change? I make you prime minister of the world, president of the world, and you can fix this issue.
Oh, I would have little boys educated separately than little girls in the early years. In the early years, I would have boys' schools and girls' schools because little girls learn differently. And also, there's been a lot of evidence to show that in the early years, when you do single gender education, little girls will try things, will take risks with things that they wouldn't in front of little boys. And little boys will try things that they wouldn't take risks in front of little girls. Like little boys are more likely to try art and painting and music. Little girls are more likely to try STEM and math and, all these things that we talk about little girls should do. So the idea is that single gender education in the early years is better for little kids because they learn differently.
What about as it relates to men? What would you change to fix the issues you were talking about with testosterone and those kinds of issues?
Talk about it. We should be talking about it. We don't talk about this issue. How many times have you heard what I just said? People don't talk about the fact that if we're going to flip this around and have men be the nurturers, they're going to have pretty low testosterone. You're going to have to supplement their testosterone. And so, and also you take their purpose away evolutionarily and they get depressed. Women have many sources of self-esteem. They have work, they have children, they're relational. And for the most part, historically, men found their self-esteem from meaningful and purposeful work, and also from protecting their families. So what we've done is we've taken their purposeful work outside the home away. We've made their purposeful work staying home with children. And, we've lowered the testosterone. So if you look at it and say, we're trying to switch, it's like a social experiment. We're trying to change something that's taken thousands of years of evolution to create in just, less than 100 years. And it's problematic. So what would I do? I would talk about it. I would have couples talk about it. I think they need to talk about the competitiveness. I think they need to talk about the envy and the jealousy and even the disappointment. I mean, a woman who comes home and sees her husband caring for the children, on the one hand, she might say, oh, my husband's so sweet and lovely, and I love that he cares for my children. And on the other hand, she says to her friends, I wish he was bringing in more money, and I wish he was taking care, I wish he was taking care of me. So it's problematic.
There was a longitudinal study done in the Philippines that followed 624 men over almost 5 years and found that those who became fathers experienced a significant decline in testosterone levels. Specifically, newly partnered fathers had a median decrease of almost 30% in morning testosterone and 35% in evening testosterone, which was significantly greater than the declines observed in single non-fathers. Moreover, fathers who reported spending 3 or more hours daily in childcare had lower testosterone levels compared to those less involved in caregiving. And there's also an impact on co-sleeping, where research indicates that fathers who co-sleep with their children exhibit lower testosterone levels than those who do not. This suggests that close proximity during sleep may further influence hormonal changes associated with parental caregiving.
Yeah.
One of the arguments I've heard before as to why men's testosterone dips if they're new fathers is because it's an evolutionary reason to make us not go out and cheat on our partner and take care of our kids.
Well, it's investment in it. So either you're invested in mating or you're invested in caring.
Yeah, so it's a good thing.
Yes and no, because you still need to have testosterone to have a relationship with your wife a satisfying relationship. So, and unfortunately, that doesn't stop men from going out and cheating on their wives, because a healthy man would say, well, we used to have sex twice a day, every day. And now that we have a baby, we only have sex once or twice a week because the baby's so small. And a healthy man would say, that's enough. I can compartmentalize. Right? A less healthy man might say, I'm going to go out and get it someplace else because I can't get it here. So, yeah, there's nuance to all the questions you're asking. But what I would say is that testosterone going down a little bit when you have a baby in the bed is fine. But the kind of testosterone we're talking about going down when you stay home and nurture, um, we'll see. It could be problematic.
My last question is about devices and technology.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of books written recently and a lot of conversation around the impact that screens, social media, mobile phones have on children. What is your thoughts and philosophy towards raising healthy kids in a world of technology?
Well, I think it's the American Pediatric Association says no technology under the age of 2 for good reason. No iPhones, no iPads, right? You want to sit and watch a Mr. Rogers when your baby is 2 together, a rerun of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, that's fine, but no technology. After that, you want to really regulate that technology. Now, why is that important? Because technology raises dopamine levels in your brain, which is why adults get addicted to it too. It's very addictive. And the problem is that with adults, when you look at technology, it does raise your dopamine, but there was some research to show that technology raises the dopamine in an adolescent's brain tenfold to that of. So in other words, it would be like if you smoked a joint, it would make you high. If an adolescent smoked the same joint, it would make them 10 times higher. It has to do with the sensitivity of the brain to dopamine and the lack of regulation. So the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that regulates emotions, and it's not fully developed till about 25. So all that dopamine that has to be regulated is more easily regulated in an adult than an adolescent. So it's not good because it leads to addiction. Okay. It's not good because particularly social media, but all kinds of technology, they get the amygdala going. Remember that little almond-shaped stress-regulating part of the brain? It turns on the stress reaction, which you don't want to do chronically. There's lots of problems with that. And in the case of social media, with adolescents, particularly adolescent girls, it takes advantage. You have to say that this was invented to take advantage. It's not a coincidence. It's manipulatively created because the reason that it's so bad for teenage girls' brains is because the self-consciousness, the perfectionism, is all the brain in a hyper-alert state of stress and fear. You're putting those girls and boys into a hyper-vigilant state of fear and stress, right? I have to be perfect. I don't look as good as them. My dress isn't as pretty. So you're putting children into a fear state, and then they can't separate from the device. It's like there was a movie, I think it was called Inception, where you could get stuck in a paradigm. You could get stuck in this fantasy, right? In a virtual reality. In a way, they get trapped in this paradigm of perfectionism, social isolation, self-consciousness, which is all the brain in a hyper-vigilant state of stress.
Anxiety.
So not good at all. Not good for adults, much worse for adolescent brains.
Yeah, I have to speak to that. So not only my kids involved with sports, year round, baseball, soccer, even football, they were involved with clubs. 4-H is an incredible club, and they're responsible for, raising livestock, purchasing, marketing, feeding, maintaining everything. And when they got to the livestock show at the county fair, they did 3 county fairs back to back. A big sign: parents, do not help your children. They would have to get up at early, 5:30, and they have to prepare the stalls because they got judged because there would be community coming in to, tour the livestock barn and enjoy the fair. And it was a lot of work. They had to show their livestock. They did pigs, they did steer, they did sheep. And so what it did is engage them constantly with a group where they had to navigate just like a team on how they would be presented at the county fairs, right? And they were involved with Awana. They were involved with church. They did summer trips. They did mission trips, to Haiti when there was an earthquake, or they've been to Africa. They've been to Bali. They've been, all over the world, and they've been exposed to so much so that, they weren't, stuck in front of a screen, right? I think most men, there's over 7-8 million men in their prime not working. Well, they're likely spending way more time in front of a screen, addicted like a drug, like heroin. And, they don't realize it. They need to be unplugged. And at the same time, they're being pampered, coddled, and, pacified by somebody, right? If there's over 7-8 million men in their prime not working, what are they doing, right? Hopefully they're taking out the garbage once a week. And hopefully you don't have to yell at them to take out the garbage once a week. And if I was to wake up every day, I think I'd feel like there was 1,000-pound weight on my chest, and it just wasn't worth. There's no purpose, right? And what we need right now is there's such a massive demand for it within the trades, all trades. And then what's coming down the pike with the infrastructure for AI and the massive power plants that are needed. We need them. We need all the manpower we can get. And, with that, there's purpose there, right? I think it's unfortunate. I think that planned obsolescence, the way, this is designed out, it just seems sad and pathetic, is that, we require all this toxic industry to create jobs. That's, unfortunate beyond belief. These toxic industries that create jobs. Let's just say the tire was the toxic industry that was causing global warming, that was going to destroy the world as we know it. But yet it provides trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of revenue to feed families. And I think, wow, couldn't they? If there was a tire that lasts forever, they couldn't put it on the market. If you created a tire that lasts forever and you wiped out that entire industry of making tires and servicing tires, and it is sad to think that we would look the other way, that we would just ignore the elephant in the room and let the world be taken over by global warming and just destroy mankind and then live on Mars. Just beyond me. We're not here to serve our shit. And I think that hopefully AI eliminates the need for toxic industry so that we don't need to create jobs. We'll have a universal income. We can focus on nutrition, physical and social activity, and have purpose in our life to climb the mountains and to get the job done. And with that, we'll finish off this video here and enjoy.
What is the most important thing we should have talked about today that we didn't talk about so far?
I think we talked about a lot, but I think, what I would say is that presence is just so critical to children, and there's no replacement. This idea that we have as a society that caregiving of children is something that can be generically assigned to others, that you can delegate other things to others, delegate your accounting, delegate your laundry, delegate your cooking. If you're a CEO, delegate everything you can, but spend time with your children. Your relationship with them, their mental health depends upon it. And that's not something we say. We say, work, make more money, everybody work, and your children will be just fine. Well, clearly, our children are not just fine.
What do I do as an employer? I employ lots of people, and I'm thinking, shit, do I need to give people 3 years off when they have a kid? Is that the...
Well, in my opinion, give them as much time off as you possibly can.
Men and women?
Men and women, whoever is the primary attachment figure. I would say whoever's going to really be responsible for caring for that child. Um, but then give them options. Give them choices of how to work in the years that their children are very young. Give them options to work part-time or to share a job or to work from home half of the week so they don't have to leave their child and still they can work. Um, Give them choices and options that allow them for some flexibility and control. If you know that an employee has young children, accept the fact that they may need to leave early and not stay as late as other people who don't have children. And that's going to make the people who don't have children angry. And you know what? Tough, because that's what those children need. Life isn't fair. It's not always fair. And if you want to have a child, you too could have that. But the idea of exact parity, tough, because that's what society needs. It needs healthy children. If you're going to have a child and you need to leave every day at 4, so you're home for your children. So flexibility, control, options, as much time off in the beginning as possible.
If you love the
All right, that was amazing. I mean, straight up to the point. It's not rocket science, honestly, not rocket science at all. Yeah, I did work extremely hard, and my kids were raised by their mom, nurtured by their mom. I was out in the field, and then I found ways as I saw the trouble on the horizon where, I knew gaming was an issue, and I went to their preschool where my daughter had graduated with the high honors and shadowing surgeons going into high school, and they were failing miserably. And I realized, I'd say, why are you allowing this? And she goes, I yell at them all day. They don't listen. And they were addicted to the screen, playing video games. And it was a weekend. If I left in the morning and I come back 8 hours later, they were still sitting in front of the screen. I'd say, have you been here the whole time? And they look at me like zombies. And I'd say, turn that off, And then I went to a parent-teacher conference and ran into a friend who our kids grew up together. And I said, "Do you here for the parent-teacher conference?" What are you talking about? And I thought, oh, that's odd. And I went to the first teacher, are all parents required to be here? No, only select parents. And she went on to show me the grades of my oldest son, failing miserably and disruptive in class. And I lost it. I said, oh, no, not on my watch. And I had 3 meetings back to back. I got home, ripped the cable out of the wall. I took all the electronics and I said, game over. And so fast forward, I got them flashcards and they got in the car, they turned the radio on, I turned it off, and we did spelling words, and they did quite well in school. My oldest son was studying environmental engineering. And, my kids, they are in their 20s, early 20s, and they own companies, and they are quite well established, and they have a world perspective. And that could not have happened, if I just ignored the elephants in the room, the white caps in the cloud formation. And I had to basically navigate the world that I lived in and not raise my kids like I was raised, and then have impact and influence and make a difference, right? And I did my best. So that's my highest encouragement to you. And with that, I wish you well. Thank you for watching High Road to You content. And this is where you take action. Nothing happens without action. Please share your story on how you incorporated nutrition, physical and social activity, how you incorporated accountability in your life, how you didn't ignore, you didn't deny, you didn't blame, but you pivoted through a difficult challenge in your life. And how did you build that foundation to overcome and thrive? And I hope this content allows you to enjoy the journey of that, right? That would be the biggest blessing for me. Share your story, share your milestones, encourage and inspire others. And with that, I wish you well.